Welcome, sinners. I'm Jason,
And I'm Rebecca, also known as Emily Sin.
and this is the Sanctuary of Sin podcast. We will cover everything delectably sinful, from kink and queer culture to cults, sex positivity, and everything in between.
Let's get sinful. Since it's Pride Month, we're taking you on a journey to the ancient world. Let's go back, way back, to a time long before modern gender politics, to the cradle of civilization itself, to dusty ziggurats, richly adorned altars, and cities ruled by gods and myths. Mesopotamia, home to a figure who embodies queerness, power, sex, and sacred rebellion, Inanna, the Sumerian goddess who refused to fit into anyone's box, not even the divine kind. So who was Inanna?
She was the goddess of love, sensuality, fertility, and procreation. But before you start picturing some nurturing Earth Mother handing out babies and blessings, hold that thought. Inanna was just as much a goddess of war, vengeance, and power. She was bold, wild, and untamed, straddling extremes like it was a full-time job. And in a way, it was.
Inanna would eventually become known by many names. Ishtar to the Akkadians and Assyrians, Sauska to the Hittites, Astarte to the Phoenicians, and even linked to Aphrodite in Greek mythology. But unlike many later versions, Inanna wasn't softened into a goddess of beauty and romance. She stayed sharp-edged, sexually autonomous, and impossible to pin down. A goddess who blurred boundaries between love and destruction, between divine and human, between man and woman.
She was never shown as a mother, never a devoted wife. Inanna was always a young, untamed woman, fully aware of her power and unapologetically wielding it. Jeremy Black put it perfectly. One aspect of Inanna's personality is that of a goddess of love and sexual behaviour, but especially connected with extramarital sex, and in a way which has not been fully researched, with prostitution. Inanna is not a goddess of marriage, nor is she a mother goddess.
Her stories show a divine woman who doesn't ask for permission. She takes. She seduces. She threatens. She starts wars. She acts with absolute autonomy and expects the world and the gods to bend. And when things go wrong, she uses her wit, her sexuality, or sheer force to make it right again.
Her temple at Uruk was the centre of her cult, but Inanna was worshipped throughout Mesopotamia. Her followers? Diverse. Her sacred spaces? Plentiful. Her clergy weren't just male or female. There was also a third category that modern eyes would likely describe as transgender or genderqueer. These weren't fringe figures, they were central. Inanna, as a divine figure, embodied gender deviance.
She was the hyper-feminine goddess of sexuality and the hyper-masculine god of war, both at once. And so her rituals reflected this duality. Her worship incorporated trans and queer identities, not just tolerated them, but made them sacred. As scholar Harris notes, the goddess Inanna herself was a symbol of gender deviance, and her rituals embraced that.
Colin Spencer expands on this too, writing, "Sacred prostitution was the central part of the ritual in the temple. The priestess performed a sacred marriage to ensure the fertility of the country and the great fortune of the new king. For the king copulated with the holy priestess at the beginning of his reign. There were lesser priestesses who were also musicians, singers and dancers. Certainly some of these were men who also copulated with both men and women."
These sacred sex workers weren't just a part of a system, they were the system. Inanna's temple economy ran in large part because of them. Sex wasn't sin, it was sacrament, and queerness wasn't marginal, it was divine. But this golden age of gender-fluid divinity didn't last forever.
As the patriarchal system strengthened, especially during and after the reign of Hammurabi, the prestige of goddesses declined. Inanna still loomed large in cultural memory, but her political and religious clout shrank. Scholar Samuel Noah Kramer noted that this decline in the divine feminine eerily mirrors the shrinking rights and status of women in society. It's a painful reminder that mythology isn't just story, it's structure. It reflects the values of a culture, and when the goddess got demoted, women and queer folks often did too.
Yet Inanna didn't vanish. Her presence lingered. Her worship endured long after temples crumbled, because she inspired something deeper than devotion. She inspired identification. Men and women alike served her, not out of fear or tradition, but because she represented something real, something liberating. She was chaos, desire, transformation, and defiance made divine.
And during Pride Month, as we celebrate queer identity, trans beauty, and the many ways we love and resist, Inanna feels like an ancestor in spirit, a reminder that queerness isn't new, that gender fluidity isn't modern, that long before colonialism and capitalism wrapped sex and gender in shame, there was a goddess dancing naked in the streets of Uruk, surrounded by sacred sex workers of every gender, declaring, "I am Inanna, I am mine."
Segment 2. The Gallae, Kurgaru, and Asinu, Sacred Gender Beyond the Binary. The cult of Inanna was a space where gender was not just fluid, it was sacred. Individuals who lived outside the binary were heavily involved in her worship. In fact, they were central to it. Many of her priests and cult members were known for their androgyny, or for fully embodying a third gender. We see this beautifully depicted in hymns and rituals dedicated to her. Inanna wasn't just tolerant of gender nonconformity, she celebrated it, transformed it, made it holy.
Let's take a moment to meet the Pili Pili, one of the most fascinating characters from Sumerian festival traditions. In the hymn, Passionate Inanna, we hear the story of an individual named Pili Pili. They're raised as a woman. The Sumerian term ki sikil is used. Inanna blesses them, hands them a spear as if she were a man, and renames them Pili Pili. From that point forward, they are the transformed Pili Pili. It's a rare glimpse into ancient gender transformation narratives. And though we can't pin down exactly what it meant by modern standards, it's clear. Inanna saw beyond the binary, and her blessings reflected that.
The spear, potentially symbolic of phallic or masculine energy, adds another layer. Was Pili Pili being transformed into a man, or into something beyond man and woman? In the language of Inanna's cult, transformation didn't mean conforming, it meant transcending. And Pili Pili was not alone. Inanna's most loyal followers, including the Gallae, Gallatur, Kurgara, and Asinu, all roles that blurred, defied, or outright obliterated gender lines.
Let's talk about the Gallae. Originally created by the god Enki to sing soothing laments to Inanna, they were sacred priests who often used Imi-Sil, a dialect of Sumerian typically spoken by women and used for female deities. These Gallae weren't just performers, they were healers, diviners, musicians, protectors of the vulnerable, and sacred sex workers. The cuneiform for Gallae, a combination of the signs for penis and anus. Their very name is a divine embrace of queer sexuality.
The Kurgara and Gallatur also appear in sacred myths, most notably in the story of Inanna's descent to the underworld. When Inanna is trapped by her sister Ereshkigal, it's not warriors or gods who rescue her. It's the Kurgara and Gallatur, beings created by Enki who are neither male nor female. They descend to the underworld, mourn with Ereshkigal, and earn Inanna's release. Their genderlessness is not incidental, it's essential. Only those beyond the binary could walk between worlds and bring back a goddess.
Later versions of the myth replace these figures with the Asinu, another third gender cult role. Some scholars suggest the Asinu may have been ritually castrated, seen by their peers as sacred conduits of both masculine and feminine power. In the Epic of Era, we hear this striking line, whose maleness Ishtar turned female for the awe of the people. Let that sink in. Inanna's power wasn't just over war and love. She could turn a man into a woman and a woman into a man. That's a quote from Passionate Inanna, penned by the High Priestess Inanna, the first known author in human history.
The hymn Passionate Inanna was the first piece of written work that has ever had a name signed to it. And the place it was found, Uruk, which is where Inanna's temple was, has actually got, to this day, a sign outside it saying the world's first words were written here. When I started looking into this originally, that was not like what I was expecting to come across. Like, it's been so interesting, so many little bits and pieces that are all interwoven into this story that are just so much a part of like where civilization started, that have just been integral to our understanding of like human civilization and where its roots come from, and the fact that those roots are queer as fuck. Inanna's temples were filled with these liminal figures, Gallae, Asinu, Kurgara. Some wore robes split down the middle, masculine on one side, feminine on the other. They presided over sacred rites, brought fortune in battle, and in some cases acted as sacred prostitutes, Hijras, believed to embody Inanna herself. There was even a description that I'd found of a community celebration in reverence of Inanna where everybody in the crowd dressed with one half in male clothing and one half in female clothing. So this was something that actually extended beyond just the priests. It was a part of celebrating the duality and the kind of masculine and the feminine aspects of Inanna throughout all of her followers.
Aye, so it was kind of like quite like widely accepted through the culture, not just in this specific sect.
Yeah, but it was just that for some of the priests was how they dressed every day.
Mm-hmm.
But it was something that was joined in by the followers and on special dates.
There are archaeological echoes of these identities too. In Mari, a statuette of a singer named Urnanshi is dedicated to Inanna. Despite the masculine name, the figure has soft features, makeup and faint breasts. We can't say for certain, but the dedication to Inanna points towards a gender-nonconforming identity. Even the British Museum holds fragments that challenge our assumptions, like a statue labelled Selima Bzuta, Hermaphrodite of Inanna. Modern translations offer a more accurate reading, person, man, woman. A person who embodies multiple genders or transcends them entirely.
This isn't just historical trivia, this is legacy. Inanna's priesthood, one of the oldest recorded, was explicitly queer and genderqueer. They were respected, celebrated, and essential to the divine order. Inanna's myths tell us that queerness isn't new, it's ancient, sacred, central. And while later patriarchal shifts, especially under Hammurabi, saw the suppression of women's power and the diminishing of queer priesthoods, Inanna's cult persisted. Her flames still burned, because she made people want to serve her, not out of fear or duty, but because she saw them. Trans people, third gender people, people who didn't fit in or didn't want to. She didn't just welcome them, she made them divine.
Inanna reminds us that gender variance isn't a modern invention. It's divine history. Queerness isn't a trend. It's a truth that's been written into our oldest stories, carved into clay, sung in temples, and embodied in ritual for thousands of years. So when we look around during Pride, when we celebrate our identities, our transitions, our love, our boldness, our refusal to conform, we are not new. We are echoes of Inanna's voice, her people, her transformed ones, her warriors, her lovers, her sacred ones, and we are still rising.
Segment 3. We've always been here. Global echoes of sacred queerness. As strange as it might sound to some people today, 2,000 years ago, queerness and religion weren't opposites. They were intimately intertwined. For thousands of years before Judaism and way before Christianity tried to silence them, queer identities were not just accepted, they were sacred.
English philosopher Edward Carpenter wrote, "The Jewish peoples, perhaps by way of protest and reaction against the excesses of the surrounding Syrian tribes, insisted on a complete divorce between sex and religion. But in much of the old pagan world, it was just the contrary. Sexual rituals were an intimate part of religion, and the wonder and glory of sex were a recognised manifestation of divinity."
Sex, gender, ecstasy. These weren't taboos, they were doors to the divine. For me, this, alongside the quote from Richard Francis Burton, where he said, "She was worshipped by men habited as women, and vice versa, for which reason in the Torah, Deuteronomy 12, verse 5, the sexes are forbidden to change dress," shows yet again another example of rules being put in place by other religions in direct opposition to their competitors at the time.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it seems like a kind of pretty standard part of the religion playbook.
Yeah. And for me, the reason why it's important to highlight is because, I feel a lot of the terms that come alongside this when a religion is so set against a certain practice or a certain people or a certain love or a certain activity, it kind of justifies this by calling it unnatural, calling it against not just God and the divine, but like nature itself. For me, the fact that before these people ever stood up and said these are the ways people are supposed to be living their lives, like all of this stuff existed, shows it is part of nature, shows it is part of the divine. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
It's just not part of the patriarchal divine. That can't be a bad thing.
It just exists out with their kind of structure of control.
Yeah, and that's why it's been a threat, and that's why it has been, well, at this point, like a 6,000-year long quest to like make certain people just hate themselves because it takes and strips all their power away.
Yeah. In other words, from Mesopotamia to Rome, from India to Syria, gender diverse people were deeply embedded in spiritual life. Queerness was not an outlier, it was central to the sacred. Trans and non-binary people weren't outside of traditional roles. They were the traditional roles. In 1978, Arthur Evans published Witchcraft and the Gay Counterculture, where he described the old religion was polytheistic. Its most important deity was a goddess who was worshipped as the Great Mother. Its second major deity was the horned god, associated with animals and sexuality, including homosexuality. These and other deities were worshipped in the countryside at night with feasting, dancing, animal masquerades, transvestism, sex orgies, and the use of hallucinogenic drugs. Sensual acts were at the heart of the old religion, since theirs was a worldly religion of joy and celebration.
Does that not just sound like a good time?
Sounds like an amazing night out.
Same-sex love and gender fluidity were often seen as markers of spiritual power. In tribal cultures across the globe, queer shamans were highly respected. Their energy was believed to bridge worlds, between the living and the dead, earth and sky, body and spirit. In ancient pagan civilizations, queer people played prominent roles in temples and rituals. One of the most striking examples comes from the priests of Cybele, the Gallae.
Cybele, or Magna Mater, the Great Mother, has roots in eastern Turkey, going back at least 6,000 years. She was the original earth goddess, later adopted by the Greeks and Romans and merged with goddesses like Rhea, Demeter, Gaia, and Atargatis. Her Gallae were eunuch priests, flamboyant, long-haired, dressed in women's robes, wild in their worship. They sang, danced, wailed, and brought the ecstasy of the goddess to the streets. And they weren't alone. The Melissae, her priestess, meaning the bees, were part of this buzzing hive of ritual and gendered devotion.
That's where Melissa's name comes
I know,
from.
because I know that her name's about bees.
Yeah. In 204 BCE, the Romans brought Cybele into their official state religion. Her temple was established in Rome, and her queer priesthood came with her. But they shocked Roman society so much that the Gallae were forced to live outside the city limits. Though not treated without contempt, there was more legal recognition for third gender people and ritual life within Roman society than in many so-called modern states today. They literally made them sleep outside, but they still had more rights in terms of gender than a lot of countries and places do today.
That's absolutely wild.
At the heart of Gallae devotion was Attis, Cybele's lover. According to myth, Attis castrated himself in a frenzy to escape marriage to a mortal woman. In mourning and devotion, The Gallae imitated him, castrating themselves in ritual during the annual festival known as the Day of Blood. This wasn't hidden or metaphorical, it was public, dramatic, and deeply sacred.
Lucian, writing in the 2nd century, describes the frenzy. As the Gallae sing and celebrate their orgies, frenzy falls on many of them, and many who had come as mere spectators afterwards are found to have committed the great act. I will narrate what they do. Any young man who has resolved on this action strips off his clothes and with a loud shout bursts into the midst of the crowd and picks up a sword from a number of swords which I suppose have been kept ready for many years for this purpose. He takes it and castrates himself and then runs wild through the city, bearing in his hands what he has cut off. He casts it into any house at will, and from this house he receives women's raiment and ornaments. Thus they act during their ceremonies of castration.
Imagine being just like an everyday Roman civilian, just carrying out your life, doing your daily, and then just like a random cock flies through your door, and then you have to give them like clays and jewellery and stuff, and like dress them up. Wild.
Aye. Sounds like fun though.
It does. Certainly liven up like an otherwise boring Tuesday.
Aye.
I don't know what my issue with Tuesdays is. It's always Tuesday. I fucking hate Tuesdays.
I maintain that Tuesday's the worst day of the week.
It is the worst day of the week.
I've got a whole supporting theory behind this.
Me too. Let's hear it. Go on.
A lot of people say it's Monday, but I don't agree with that. Because Monday, you're fresh off the weekend.
Yep.
You go into work. Everybody's got their stories for the weekend. There's like a decent bit of chat. Oh, what did you get up to? Like everybody's still kind of like a bit upbeat off the weekend and like seeing people again and telling them all about what's happened. Tuesday was when the tiredness really kicks in because people are like a bit tired off their weekend and then they have like their whole day of work on a Monday.
Yeah.
And that's when it's dead. There's like no chat on a Tuesday. Nobody's got anything interesting to say. Everybody's just like, oh, here we go. It's Tuesday. By the time you're getting to Wednesday, people are starting to like, they've settled back into like, all right, we're during the week, it's working time. Let start getting a wee bit more like more chat about them. Thursday, you're now in the build up to the weekend again.
Yeah.
People are starting to get excited talking about plans for the weekend. Friday is the weekend.
Yeah.
Like everybody's buzzing for whatever they're gonna get up to. They've got usually like plans that night. That's when the weekend begins. Everybody's like upbeat and ready for the weekend to start. And then Saturday, Sunday, full weekend mode. Like
Fun times.
Fun times.
Yeah.
So Tuesday is the worst day of the week.
I feel the exact same way. I feel like everyone moans about Wednesday, but it's like, mate, you're halfway.
Aye, like
Like,
that sort of brings with it this like, oh, we've made it halfway.
aye. Like, we've got less to go after this.
Yep.
And then Thursday it basically feels like the weekend as well. Because you're like, oh, it's just... like,
It's tomorrow.
It's tomorrow. Aye. So back to Inanna. It's shocking to us now, but it wasn't madness. It was a path to sacred transformation. In these ecstatic rites, the Gallae didn't just serve the goddess, they became her. One Roman writer, Philostratus, described how worshippers would make love to the Gallae, embodying Attis to receive the god's divine essence. The tie between god and man cannot be thought of in closer or stronger terms. It passes over into sensual terms.
Of course, this uneasy tolerance changed when Christianity gained state power. Suddenly, queerness wasn't a sacred role, it was a threat. The spiritual became sinful, ecstasy became hysteria, transformation became perversion. Firmicus Maternus, writing under Constantine, spat venom at them. In their very temples can be seen deplorable mockery before a moaning crowd, men taking the part of women, revealing with boastful ostentation this ignominy of impure and unchaste bodies. They broadcast their crimes and confess with superlative delight the stain of their polluted bodies.
And of course, never one to miss a rant, our pal Augustine had something to say on the matter as well. calling them castrated perverts, madmen, fully unmanned and corrupted. Christianity and colonialisation worked hand in hand to rewrite the cultural scripts of half the world. Goddess worship, queer priesthoods, and non-binary genders were replaced with patriarchy, sin, and shame. Where once gender diversity was part of the divine, it became evidence of savagery, used to justify colonial domination.
This wasn't just theological, it was strategic. The colonial project needed to paint Indigenous and ancient cultures as backward, immoral, and inferior. So it erased our queer ancestors, or worse, turned them into villains and deviants. The Gallae, like the Kadesha in ancient Canaan, gender-nonconforming priests of Hijra, were crushed under centuries of violent repression. Where Kashida once meant holy ones, the King James Bible translated it as sodomites. Later translations preferred male shrine prostitutes. A medieval English version used the term womanish men.
It wasn't just a spiritual shift, it was a rewriting of language, law, and memory itself. And this wasn't just in the Middle East or Europe. Across India, similar priesthoods flourished. The Hijra have been a part of South Asian religious life for thousands of years. Referenced in the Mahabharata, Kama Sutra, and medical texts like the Sushruta Samhita, which stated clearly that queer and trans tendencies were natural, inborn. As Ruth Vanita writes, colonial influence helped so-called social reformers purge Indian pre-modern literature of its homoerotic elements and to heterosexualise Indian classics such as the Urdu Ghazal. But what the reformers couldn't do was change the words of the Kama Sutra, that non-judgmental Indian erotic classic of the 4th century CE. So I actually bought the Kama Sutra and started reading it the other day. I was really surprised because there was not really any sexual positions detailed in it much at all. There was a lot of different types of things that were categorized like different kisses, bites. I've not finished it yet, but from what I could find, that wasn't something that was kind of included in it at all. But it's all that I've ever really heard or known about it previous to that.
Yeah, that was also my understanding without having done research. That was my understanding of what it was as well.
But yet, when I looked it up and when I read it, that has never really been a part of what was involved in it, and it can all be boiled down to this mistranslation in the early 19th century. How it's actually described as a manual for life that includes things about marriage and sex and power and money, and it's not a sex manual.
No.
In any way, but it's always been portrayed as this because people have viewed the East, quote unquote, through this kind of colonialist lens of being exotic and mysterious and obsessed with sex, and people have capitalized on that, and most of the books or things that include quote unquote Kama Sutra positions are just people using that name to piggyback on to sell their books, and it's actually not really got anything to do with the Kama Sutra itself. Wild.
It was more just a manual of practical advice for life and dating,
and although it does have some I hate to call it sexual tips, but it has got ways in which people can interact with each other in a sexual fashion. From what I have read so far, and I will come back if I'm wrong, I have not necessarily seen specific sexual positions within it, but with different ways to intertwine the body when embracing and things like that.
A lot of lists.
It's very list heavy. It was written 2,000 years ago, so I think we can give them a pass.
I think considering how sort of progressive quite a lot of the advice and stuff in it is, even 100 years ago, quite a lot of the stuff that's in that would have been shockingly progressive.
Yeah, there's a whole chapter on how to be a sex worker, and the types of people, the types of clients you should have, and the types of support networks and stuff you should have. But I feel we'll probably cover that at some point in a different episodes. We'll not get too off topic, but
Yep.
it's definitely an interesting read, if a mildly boring one, and just the style that it's written. But again, it's old as fuck, so fair.
Yep. So speaking of, the Kama Sutra divides human beings into 3 types: men, women, and people of a third nature. The latter, the text explains, can be further divided into masculine and feminine appearing men who desire other men. Other ancient texts, including Sanskrit plays, Jain scriptures, and even Hindu medical writings, openly acknowledge this third category of human being with same-sex desire. Hijra priestesses still serve Bahuraja Mata, the goddess of chastity, power, and gender transformation. Despite modern prejudice, they are living proof of a lineage that colonialism could not fully destroy.
In Hindu cosmology, the divine literally contains queerness. Shiva is Ardhan Arishvara, half man, half woman, represents the cosmic unity of masculine and feminine. The divine is fluid, whole, and beyond binary. As French historian Alain Danielou wrote, the hermaphrodite, the homosexual, and the transvestite have a symbolic value and are considered privileged beings, images of Ardhanarishvara. These patterns repeat across time and geography. Across
the Americas, two-spirit people held respected roles in medicine, ritual, and diplomacy. In Samoa, the Fa'afafine embody a revered gender tradition. In the Philippines, the Bakla have been spiritual guides and performers since pre-colonial times. In Thailand, the Kathoi, the so-called ladyboys, are a part of long-standing cultural traditions of gender variance. All of these roles were devalued or erased under colonial Christianity. So when someone today calls queerness a modern invention, or says trans people are a fad, they're not only wrong, they're echoing colonial propaganda. Queer and trans people are not new. We are ancient. Thanks for joining us, you filthy little sinners. We hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we enjoyed making it. We're keeping this podcast deliciously ad-free, so if you want to support what we do, head over to our Patreon and join our Church of Sin.
If you're craving some new personally recommended kink gear, check out our website, thesanctuaryofsin.com, for all your naughty needs, and use the code SINPOD at checkout for a 15% discount.
Got ideas, feedback, or just want to tell us what made you blush? We'd love to hear from you.
You can find all our socials, including Instagram, Twitter, and FetLife, on our Linktree, which is linktree/thesanctuaryofsin. Thank you for sinning with us.
And don't forget to tune in next time for our next confession.